Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 187. Follow your guide as today the Amateur Traveler goes to Beijing, China on a guided tour. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we do get to today's interview, I have some news. The first news, of course, is the sad news. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those who had family members on the Air France Flight 447, which disappeared in the Atlantic. The second news item is also sad but not tragic, and that is that Melvina Dean, the last survivor of the Titanic, died this week at the age 97. And just so we leave you on a good news item, if you're a pet owner and you're flying Southwest, you are now allowed to take with you your dog or your cat on board the flight in a pet carrier. They have to be a small dog or a small cat, and it will be $75 each way. For links to all of those news items, as well as some others, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Joy Dupont, who has come to talk to us about Beijing. Joy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Now, we talked a little bit beforehand that there could be several places we could talk to in China. You're not in China. You're in Florida. What's the connection to China with you?
Well, it's quite a story, Chris, and it actually goes back 40 years, which is a cycle, and this is almost a completion of a cycle. I studied Chinese in college. I minored in Chinese when I was in college, and I went to Taiwan to study Chinese for a year back in the 60s. And my first job out of college at the UN, where I continued my studies of Chinese. And even before that, I've always been fascinated by everything Chinese. Even when I was a little girl and my mother used to take us to Chinese restaurants, it was just from there on. And I suspect I've had many past lives in China, and I feel a heart center to the Chinese people and culture and language and everything else.
And your first trip to China was when then?
Well, my first trip to Taiwan was actually in '69, and it's a funny story because I was working at the UN and working as a proofreader in English, because you're only allowed to work in your own language, your own official language, and studying Chinese, talking to the Chinese proofreaders. And I wasn't really wanting to be there. I wanted to be in China. China being closed, they offered me a job in Taiwan as an editor of one of their newspapers. So I went to Taiwan, studied there for a year, spoke fluent Mandarin at that time, and I am teaching it a little bit now. But I met my ex-husband there, who happened to be a Frenchman. So I went on to live a French life, got married, lived in France, and China just kind of went away. And then 3 years ago, this friend of mine, Douglas, who is now in Beijing, who you might want to interview too, moved to China to teach English, and it just kind of sparked the whole thing all over again. Next thing I knew, I was being offered a trip to China, and 3 years ago, I went to mainland China for the first time and fell in love all over again.
Interesting. And if I should follow in your footsteps and go to Beijing, which is definitely on my list, what should I see?
Oh, my God, there is so much to see in Beijing. But the first thing you absolutely have to see is the Great Wall.
Okay.
I have now been there 3 times, and I must say it's a thrill every single time I go there. This wall stretches for over 6,000 kilometers, and when you stand there and you look at these steps and think, am I going to climb that? And maybe as long as you climb the first step, you're considered a hero in China, a real man. You just have to climb the first step. The steps are not even even. They're like maybe 6 inches, and then they're 8 inches, and they're stone, and you wonder how these horsemen rode up this wall at night with no lights, and how this thing was built. It's just awesome. There's no other word to describe it. It is so huge and awesome. So the Great Wall is a must.
And I understand from Beijing there's a number of different places you can go, some more touristed than others, depending on how far out you drive to the Great Wall. Do you have any recommendations on how to get there or where to go or where not to go?
Well, I have a particular tour company that I use in China, and he always takes us to the right place. And I can't say exactly where it is, but it is not the most crowded place, and it probably is the most scenic place. Just an awesome, awesome sight to behold anywhere you go. And a lot of the martial arts people would really like to go there, too, because it brings back that whole scene. And on the way to the Great Wall, you pass these tombs from the Ming Dynasty. And they're all feng shuied, and they're all in a particular order, and they show you particular patterns in feng shui of the tombs of the Ming Dynasty. The other thing that's, I think, very fascinating, a lot of people say, oh, it's touristy, you don't need to go there, it's government, is the cloisonné factory.
Oh, okay.
So the cloisonné factory is where these artists really make these cloisonné vases, and you see how they form the paints actually from clay. It's all natural. They put dyes in the clay. I mean, it's just beyond belief, these craft people. And a lot of them are young, and a lot of them are dying crafts because the young people don't want to work in these artist centers anymore because it's just old-fashioned and old conditions and the firing of the kilns. They'd much rather be working in the factories and the restaurants of modern Beijing. So many of these art forms, if they're not kept up, are definitely dying. And that includes the cloisonné, that includes the jade factory, which is, I could live in the jade factory, Chris. The beauty of these jade statues, these horses made out of green jade, the whole energy of, and it's huge. And they have a restaurant there that you can eat at. It's just, and they show you how they make the jade and what's real and what's glass and how to tell the difference. These are art forms that are so wonderful in China that may not be around forever. There's also the rug factories where they take you to make the rugs, and the pearls. And everybody says they're touristy, but it's something you got to see. And then there's the temples. There's this one temple that I love, and it's called the Lama Temple, and there's this, like, it must be 50 foot tall wooden Buddha in the middle of the temple, in the middle of the structure. People are lighting incense and the monks are there, and it's just a very, very sacred place right in the middle of Beijing. And then there's the Temple of Heaven, which is totally feng shui, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. It's round, and every aspect of it is just magnificent. And that's not even including the Forbidden City, which is like hours and hours and miles of walking, but it just brings you back to that time with the concubines and the emperors and all that. Then there's the Beijing Zoo with the pandas, and then there's the Summer Palace, which was the summer home for the emperors, and it's just absolutely magnificent with boat rides and all the rest of that good stuff. And that's only the beginning of the sites, and we haven't even talked about the Olympic Village, which was just created, which I haven't personally seen, but I hear it's quite magnificent.
A couple times you've brought up feng shui, and I'm not sure that everybody who's listening knows what that is, but we're talking about, and as I recall, my Chinese is a little rusty here, but we're talking about a word that is the combination of two of the elements, wind and water, as I recall.
Very good.
And
good.
we're talking about something that where you are aligning things towards particular directions on the compass because that is thought to be more fortuitous. Am I explaining that well?
That's beautiful. That's
okay.
Beautiful. Very, very nice. And a lot of China is feng shui. We haven't even gotten to Tiananmen Square, which of course has mixed reviews, but that's where the government buildings are. And right across from Tiananmen Square, there's the largest herbal pharmacy in the world, or in China at least. And of course, everything in China is the largest in the world. That's just the way they are. It's the biggest. The airport is actually amazing. The Beijing airport is amazing. And of course, it was all built for the Olympics. And thank God, because it's really changed the face of Beijing. But there's this herbal pharmacy, and you go in there, and it's the largest herbal pharmacy in China, and they have acupuncturists that will give you lectures and examine you for free and tell you a little about acupuncture, and you can buy all these natural herbs. It's just amazing. And that's what Chinese people, they're not into medicine and pills and drugs the way we are.
I think of pharmacy and I think of health, and obviously that brings up issues about the air quality in China because the pollution being so bad there often. Are there better times of year to go? Is it better to avoid the real oppressive heat of the summer, for instance?
There are actually better times of year to go than the summer. The fall and the spring are probably the best times, although I've actually been in the summer many times. It's not that bad, but because Beijing is in the north, Beijing meaning northern capital, it's not too bad. But I would say the fall, September, October is a lovely time, or the spring when the cherry blossoms come out and plum blossoms and the willows, the green starts coming out. There are enormous amount of parks and public areas in Beijing as well. So I would say, yeah, definitely the summer is hot. And the winter's cold.
But on average, it's comfortable. So.
On average, it's comfortable. There's another area of Beijing that is not touristy. It's called Hutong, Hutong, and Hutong is a must. This is where you get to ride a rickshaw. This is where you get to go down these narrow streets like you imagine old China to be. And they have actually a hotel there. When you go to Beijing, you have to stay in this hotel, and I'll arrange it for you. This woman, and I met the designer, she took an old shoe factory. These hutongs are like little walled cities, if you will. And she gutted the whole thing, and they made this gorgeous hotel. I'll email you some pictures if you like. And it's just fabulous in the middle of this little tiny section with little tiny streets in the middle of Beijing. So these are the secrets, of course, of Beijing tourism.
Well, and my understanding is that these neighborhoods, like you're talking about, are rapidly disappearing from Beijing, these older neighborhoods.
They are.
And those that are surviving often because they're starting to open up to tourists, so they're changing also, but as a rapid modernization is happening in Beijing, those are going to be harder and harder places to see.
Right. As with with the whole world. And there's another area, Chris, that's really kind of interesting. It's almost like a Greenwich Village or whatever you guys have out there in California. It's called 798. And what happened was the government abandoned all these old factories, and the young people and the artists took them over.
Oh, interesting.
And they made lofts, and they made art galleries, and they made little restaurants, and there's graffiti on the walls, and it's colorful, and it's little cafes and Starbucks and music, and it's an amazing area that a lot of people don't know about that's up and coming in Beijing. Now, a couple of other things that I want to mention. Number one is the silk factory. When you go there, you actually get an opportunity to see the silkworms. You get an opportunity to see how the silk quilts are created and work that goes into them. And then you get to shop in the showroom, which is absolutely amazing. The silk in China is just like no other silk anywhere else. Like most of the artisan work, it's just exquisite.
Now, you mentioned that you're working with a tour company when you go there. Is that how you're getting around, is you're getting around with the tour company?
Yes, and I really suggest tours in China. I mean, you can do China on your own, but to go with Chinese guides, and there are loads of them, you can get them anywhere, or you can use a tour company. They really give you insight that you wouldn't get if you went just by yourself or with a book. And I find that true in all of my travels, that if you go with a guided tour, you get some guides that really know their stuff.
And who's the tour company you work with?
It's Regent Tours. I work with them pretty much whenever I go, Regent China Tours, and I can get people in touch with them.
Okay.
There's one other place, it's just absolutely when you go to Beijing, you have to go, and this is another place that hopefully will last a long time. And I haven't even mentioned the food. I actually
We're going to get there.
Yeah. I actually did a cooking school tour 3 years ago in China, and we went to cooking schools and learned how to cook Chinese, which I still don't know how to do, but it was a delicious tour. And there's this one restaurant in Beijing called the Bai Family Restaurant, B-A-I Family Restaurant, and it's a whole courtyard, and all of the waiters and waitresses are dressed in Qing Dynasty costumes. That's the kimono-like costumes, and the men are looking like eunuchs, and the women are concubines, and they have Chinese opera there, and the food is magnificent, and it's all done in reds and gold, and it's just in the middle of the city, and it's got a garden, and it's just an amazing place. You could just spend hours at this restaurant called Bai Family Restaurant.
As long as we're talking food, any other food experiences we should not miss?
Every experience in China is a food experience not to be missed. First of all, learn how to use chopsticks.
Sure.
A lot of people will go over and they won't know how to use chopsticks. Breakfast. I mean, the Chinese, you won't believe how much they eat. They eat 3 meals a day. They eat all the time, and they're still skinny, and they're still little because they do a lot of walking. They do a lot of walking around the city and whatever they're doing. But
yeah, when I was in Shanghai, when I saw anyone who was overweight, they were a tourist.
That's right. That's right. They're all little, these Chinese. Kind of have a little jealousy thing with that going on. They're all so beautiful. And they're so gracious. The people of China, and I know you experience this too in Shanghai, they're gracious. Anything you want, you'll get. The hotels are gorgeous. Did you have gorgeous hotels?
Well, I stayed in a wonderful business class hotel because I was there in business, so it was magnificent, but wouldn't be something that I would spend my own money to stay in, I'm sure.
Most of them have swimming pools. Most of them have great restaurants. Most of the breakfasts are buffets at your hotels. I think you can really get pretty much anything to eat. A lot of the restaurants have these fish tanks in them where you can pick out your own fish and they'll cook it up for you. There's a lot of exotic food in China. You really kind of have to know what you're eating. Or not know what you're eating.
Yeah, not know, I found sometimes helps. Now, we also have a number of people who listen to the show who are independent travelers. Do you have any recommendations if I was to go over there on my own in terms of less expensive accommodations or street food that you really ought to try out or things for a more budget traveler?
I don't think you can go wrong. I mean, bottled water is the norm over there. Not
Right.
that it's really great anyway, but it is cheap and drinkable. And I've eaten oranges off the street. I've eaten fruit. I haven't had ever a problem with anything. Unfortunately, there's still all the KFCs, which is like the biggest thing in China.
Right.
The McDonald's
Mhm.
and the places like that, if you really have Western food seizures or whatever. But the food is magnificent, and it's cooked in small little pieces, and it's healthy, and it's fresh. And I think anywhere you go, you're not going to find anything that you have to really worry about as far as I'm concerned. And traveling on your own can be fine, too. Pretty much the Chinese love to speak English.
Mhm.
I speak Chinese, and they won't speak to me in Chinese. They all want to speak English. Another place that really is not to be missed are the tea houses. There are tea houses that serve wonderful Chinese herbal teas, and you can buy them there, and it's just a delight to your taste buds to go to these tea houses.
Okay. What's the best day you've had in Beijing?
Oh, the best I have had in Beijing. Oh, my God. Always when I go to the Bai Family Restaurant, I absolutely adore that restaurant. The other thing is there used to be, and I don't know if there still is, there used to be a Starbucks at Forbidden City before the Olympics. And when the Olympics came, the Chinese government decided to take the Starbucks out, and I think that was very nice because you certainly don't want a Starbucks in the middle of what's supposed to be ancient history. But there was a tea house in the Forbidden City as well that they took out. And if they brought that back, that is something that is not to be missed, to go to the Forbidden City and have tea in this particular tea house. That and the Lama Temple, for me, are really highlights. Just the energy of the places are so special.
Thinking back to the first trip you made there, you'd already been to Taiwan, you'd already studied Chinese, you were much more aware of the culture than most travelers. What still surprised you?
The number of people, Chris.
Okay. I
And
know what you
I've
mean.
been to Japan, and I've been to Tokyo and the subways and Osaka, and I never saw as many people as that. But when I went to Beijing and I was in their train station in Beijing, my God, you just have to keep breathing. And then they have the security check where you put your valise through, and everybody is like going at a fast pace. If you slow down, you feel like you're going to be trampled. It's just overwhelming the number of people in public places. And you say to yourself, how do they do it? But the Chinese, I believe, are a group consciousness, much more so than we here in the States. So to them, being a part of a group is a norm. I don't think I could survive it otherwise. We came back in the train station in Beijing, and this was during a time where there were restrictions, and you're supposed to wait in line for taxis, and some foreigners don't wait in line, but I was with a Chinese guide who happened to be a member of the Communist Party and followed the rules, and we waited for 2 hours for a taxi to get out of the Beijing train station because of the rules. And, you know, Americans aren't used to rules. So that was a little challenging, but we do have to honor that they have a lot of people to control, and we are guests in their country. So I think a smile is always a good thing to wear when you're in a foreign destination.
What do you wish you'd known before you went there?
More Chinese. I really do. And I wish I could learn how to cook, because I studied all the classes. We learned how to make dumplings and all that, but it just went in one ear and out the other. To learn how to cook Chinese, to learn how to really know the culture of China is an art. And I think a lot of the young people today in China are different than the others were, of course, the older people that knew these art forms. And now many of them are just into being American-type people and the money and the clothes and all that. And there's a certain something that I think they will discover through their history. And the other thing I forgot to mention, and I hope you experienced this too, Chris, are the foot massages.
I did not, no.
Oh, my God. foot reflexology, an hour and a half for $25. And it's only from the knee down, and of course you can get full body massages, but it's like nothing you've ever had, and you walk out and you feel like you're walking on air. And it's a good thing to do the day after you come back from the Great Wall.
That sounds like a plan.
Then there's one other thing. They have a Kung Fu martial arts show at night. Which is really quite wonderful. It's done by the monks at the Shaolin Temple, which is where the Kung Fu training is. And it's quite a show. So there's shows at night, there's acrobatic shows, and there's one other place that when you go to Beijing you can't miss too. This is a shopping center. It's kind of jazzy, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's got a laser light show.
Okay.
It's outdoors. You walk down this corridor, and above you see the fish swimming and the scenes of China, and it's all above you, and it's all lit up, and it's beyond belief. You saw the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. There's just so much that the Chinese have done to Beijing to make it a wonderful city for tourists.
You mentioned going to the Forbidden City and finding a Starbucks, so there are definitely times where it's not as foreign an experience necessarily, or as you're looking for, maybe even necessarily. When, though, did you feel furthest from home?
Oh, well, it wasn't in Beijing, but there is a place in China that you have to go to. It's called Yangshuo, Yangshou, and it's outside of a city called Guilin, which is Guilin, and it's not far from Shanghai. But this is a place where you see those incredible mountains that are like humps of camels and the waterways, and you raft down the river, and these mountains are all around you, and it's still and it's quiet. And the women are washing clothes by the side of the river, and the water buffaloes are still harvesting the land with the farmers, and it is out of this world. I could go and live there.
Do you have any particular resources that you use to prepare you for China? Guidebooks or travel sites?
Well, I like InfoHub.
Okay.
Regent Tours website is incredible because it has all of the different cities in China on it. And then there's any number of guidebooks for Beijing that are useful. The other book that really was lovely that came out in May of last year, I believe, it was the National Geographic that was on China.
Oh, okay.
The whole issue. Did you see it?
I probably have it in my nightstand unread still. I've got a stack more than a foot tall right now, but...
Right. It's just very useful. It's got a huge map of China in it. It's got a lot of different articles about old and new China.
As you think back at your trips to Beijing in particular, who's the most memorable person you've met?
I would say it's Yin, and Yin is the director of Regent Tours in China. He is an amazing man. He speaks fluent English. He's got a story. His family went through the Cultural Revolution. His mother was a teacher and his father was an accountant, and they were shipped off to the wilderness, and then they came back, and now he drives an $80,000 car, which he paid cash for. And the story of China is the story of Yin, and he loves showing people his country, and he's a gracious host, and he takes care of everything, and takes us to all the right places and shows us the right things and teaches us a little Chinese. We'll get on the bus every morning and he'll say, "Zao Shang Hao," which means good morning, and he'll make the whole bus say, "Zao Shang Hao," and he'll teach everybody a little Chinese, and he's probably the most memorable person that I've met in all my travels to China.
Okay. As we wind this down, 2 more questions for you. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Beijing when... what?
I suppose you would say when all these people come up and offer you these fabulous, inexpensive purses or whatever they sell on the street and just want to give it away to you. They're just so inexpensive. When you're shopping, you really know you're in Beijing.
And then if you had to summarize Beijing in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Regal. Delicious. overwhelming.
Interesting. Well, Joy, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your love of China and specifically of Beijing.
Well, Chris, I can't wait to see you go there, too, and share this love with me.
I know that for some of you who are independent travelers, this show was not the show you were looking for on Beijing because we did focus on a guided tour. And yes, if you are looking for a way to book the guided tour we talked about today, Joy is a travel agent who can help you with that. And you'll find a link to her site at the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. And for those of you who are more of an independent traveler, I'm thinking that later on we'll revisit Beijing and we'll revisit it from an independent traveler point of view. For the internet resource for today, we're going to go from far afield in Beijing to closer to home, and I'm going to recommend nextstop.com. Nextstop says it is a place to share what you love to do near where you live. Discover what other people love all over the world. And so you might check that out. It is an online community for travelers, nextstop.com. And finally, in news from the community, I have double thank yous that I'd like to offer. First of all, I put out a request on June 2nd for some reviews on iTunes because the Amateur Traveler had dropped off the featured area, and I get a lot of new listeners because they see the logo there. And specifically, I'd like to thank JJA Loves God, Be a Traveler, and Capo Beach Jane, who wrote wonderful reviews for the show that were really touched me. I really appreciated what you had to say and the positiveness that you had and how much you're enjoying the show. I'd also like to send thanks out to all the people who answered the question I asked last week about taking a trip as a blogger for familiarization with the resort. That does look like I will be going to Cozumel later this month. And so far, unanimously, the people who wrote were encouraging. I think Heather represented the sentiment with this paragraph. With regard to your question about taking the complimentary press trip to Yucatan you mentioned, I wouldn't even hesitate. Look on it as a perk in return for the huge amount of free content and enjoyment you've given your listeners, for the times when you've given up your weekends and worked late to produce the show, for the headaches and technical hassles that you've had to work through, and for the funds you've had to put into maintaining the site with a little back in return. Thanks, Heather, and thanks all of the rest of you who also wrote in encouragement. And I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit about Cozumel later on. We also had a number of wonderful comments about the Estonia show, both from people who've been there and enjoyed it. It's a great country. It's a beautiful country, was one of the comments. And thanks for the podcast. My wife and I will be taking a Norwegian cruise of the Baltic capitals in August, and this gave us a bit of the flavor of the areas to consider while off the ship. Was something that was added by Jerry. So thanks for all of you who commented this week, who sent me emails, and especially those of you who did the reviews. Again, all of those are great ways to support the show. The email address is host@amateurtraveler.com. The site is amateurtraveler.com, and you can also find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.